Hey everyone, I'm Christian Miller. I was assigned Michael's speech to review. And Michael's speech is about the negative impact that private prisons have on American society. He supports this claim with three secondary points. Number one, that private prisons influence state and federal law. Private prisons influence immigration law. And number three, that private prisons want as many people incarcerated as possible. I'm defending the fact that private prisons are actually beneficial to American society. Going into Michael's first point, that private prisons influence state and federal legislature. Michael provided a few solid points on this issue, but his evidence was often not explained nor relevant to his main point. The first piece of data that Michael provided was that the CCA made over $1.8 billion on incarcerations in the year 2013. But we are a country that's $18 trillion in debt. So I don't see how this has a negative effect on American society. Private prisons are locking up criminals that have done terrible things to this society. So by locking them up, we're actually making this a safer society, and we're making a profit while doing so. Michael mentions later that private prisons are beginning to close down. But if that's the solution to this negative effect that he's looking for, that's not going to benefit society. An article by the Occupy theory states that the closing of private prisons would terminate over 15,000 jobs, lose over $1.3 billion annually, and force prisoners to live in a public prison, which are already overpopulated and have considerably worse living conditions. On to Michael's second point, he claims that private prisons influence immigration law. To prove this, Michael stated that the CCA spent $4.4 million in order to have private prison officials directly influence our lawmakers. He claimed that this would increase the amount of immigrants going to prison. But a statistical article by the Bureau of Justice claimed that private prisons in 2014 held only 22% Hispanic males, compared to 37% black males and 33% white males. Among that 22% Hispanic male inmates, only 20% of them were charged with immigration offenses. This shows that the immigrants are not being affected by this legislative law as much as Michael was stressing about. Since Hispanic males have the lowest percentage among male inmates, and an even lower percentage of Hispanics that were arrested for immigration offenses, it is clear that immigration laws do not have a significant effect on them. Michael's third and final point states that private prisons want as many people incarcerated as possible. He supports this with stating that private prisons have a minimum occupancy requirement. He goes on to say a few sentences later that 5 prisons have closed down because they could not meet their required occupancy. This shows that even though these prisons want more people to fill up the requirement, police officers are not going to arrest individuals on absurd charges just to simply fill these prisons. Police officers are going to find a legitimate reason to arrest people and put them in jail. But an article by ProPublica claims that 2 more private prisons have closed down in the year 2015. This also adds to show that private prisons are failing to meet their requirements, when Michael said that they're actually looking to incarcerate as many people as they want, or as they can, sorry. Michael goes on to say that states wasted $2 million using CCA prisons instead of their own public prisons. But what he failed to mention to say was where that money was going. It's not being merely wasted. An article by Hayes Margaret, who has a PhD in criminal justice, claims that private prisons provide better living conditions, have higher security, and have a very effective rehabilitation program. They also keep public jails from overflowing and are actually safer. So the more private prisons that close down is actually going to hurt society. And I want to conclude with just saying that private prisons actually are going to benefit society. And I'm sorry, Michael, but I didn't do this.
All right, structurally, everything is clear. I think on the first argument, you just talk about how much money is being spent. You kind of put it in context. I don't know how significant that particular point is. The closing down of prisons means a loss of jobs, so there's an economic impact there. How I'm supposed to weigh that, though, is not quite clear. I think that you've got a good argument encased in here that says that the private prisons are supplementing the public prisons and providing a benefit as a consequence of that. That the contracts that they have that require that they have capacity, for instance, is just a way to ensure that they're going to be able to keep those open. If they can't keep them at a particular level, they're going to close them because they're not economically viable, which is the argument that you're making. I think that makes perfect sense. The argument about immigration is fine. The statistics that you use are kind of interesting. It sounds like it's a small percentage deal with immigration violations. I know that people aren't being imprisoned for being in the country illegally, so I don't know what the immigration violations might consist of, whether they're importing people, like they're coyotes, or they're multiple violators of laws or something like that. That could be clarified a little bit, but I thought that you did a nice job kind of trying to diminish the significance of the advocate's point on that particular point. On the third point, this is where you make your most straightforward argument. Look, if we got 5 prisons that are closing, that doesn't sound like these private prisons have all that much power, and that it just simply means that if they can't make a buck doing what they're doing, they're not going to be in operation. And then you make a good argument that suggests that there's a substantial benefit to having those prisons. I think you make a good counterclaim for the argument. I'm not sure that you always contrast the evidence that the advocate used on these points as well as you could, but I thought that your argument was clear at the end of the day, so that's what you really need.